So moving on to our first panel discussion of today, we also have the sun out, which is great. Has FinTech delivered? Has the rise of FinTech truly changed financial services for the better? And are consumers better off now than they were a decade ago? And what more must we do now to ensure a fairer and more democratic financial services system for the future? To discuss and to introduce the panelists, I'm thrilled to welcome Kimberley Abbott, who's the founder and CEO of Vested, on stage.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We're very pleased to be the first panel to kick you off today. Before we get going, I would like to introduce who we are joined with today. So we've got Heather Cobb, who's the SVP of Member Operations at Tide. We've got Lesley Lee, the CEO of Impact. We've got Cressey, who's the director of the FinTech Innovation Lab at Accenture. And last but definitely not least, we've got Brattel, the CEO of Lab One. Now, it is an exciting day to be here today, but as you heard Janine mention at the start, it's also a very exciting day, particularly relevant to this panel, with the launch of the FinTech Impact Report, which was something ourselves at Vested Impact we're very proud to collaborate on with Accenture, Innovate Finance, and the Data City. And the idea behind that report was to answer the question above, which is, are we measuring up? Not how much FinTech might be contributing to jobs or the economy, but how are the great companies here and hundreds of you in the room contributing to society as a whole and the issues that matter to people around us. So the two main questions we're going to dive into in this panel is how do we build businesses that are a force for good, and what more must we do? Because as Janine mentioned, there is still work to be done. So we only have 20 minutes, so the panelists have assured me that they can be very brief. So if you have any further questions, you'll need to chase them for coffee later. But to kick us off and to set that scene a little, Graham, I'm going to ask you first. Why is it important to look at the real impact that FinTech has?
First off, download our report. We're really excited by it. A lot of work gone into it, and there's some great stuff in there that's hopefully very useful. But what we really wanted to focus on was data, because we like data, as Janine says, and actually there was very little data about impact. Lots of data about finance and valuations, very little about what actually matters in terms of what organizations like FinTech are actually doing.
Right.
Data was the first reason that we did it. We wanted a new data set and we wanted to be part of that. We like that at Accenture as much as FinTechs like that. Secondly, was in terms of broadening the question. So ESG's been very internal looking. SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are very external looking. It's about the impact that an organization is having in the world, and we think that's far more important. So we wanted to do that. And we also wanted to look at the role of finance, because where there's a role for finance, there's an opportunity for FinTech. So we're not on track to hit the SDGs. I don't think that's new news. There isn't enough money out there to fund the goals that are there. That's probably not new news either. And also, the external impact of an organization, particularly one that finances others, is 700 times more than its own organizational impact with its own people and where it's based. So huge, huge, huge opportunity for FinTech in that. So that was why we did it, and yeah, excited to launch it today.
Thanks, Graham. One of the key parts of the report, and we've just heard from Zilch a lot actually about inclusion. And one of the data points from the report was that over a quarter of UK FinTechs do have a significant positive impact on reducing inequalities. And so I wanted to ask you, Heather, here at Tide, how do you focus your products and services on being a force for good, and what's actually important in terms of how FinTechs can build more inclusive and equitable societies through their products and services?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think FinTech can absolutely have a role in reducing inequality by broadening that financial access, and Tide, of course, is focused on doing that for the SME sector, and we know that access to financial services, that's critical, so that's critical for personal growth, for SME growth, but also to spur national growth. And I think that is, of course, super important. And I think supporting entrepreneurs is a great way that we can have that impact. So at Tide, how do we do that? We leverage the technology. We make it super easy for somebody to go from the moment that they have an idea, hey, I'd like to start a business, to bringing that to life. And that starts from actually establishing the business through Companies House, company formations, getting set up with a business account, and then using our financial and admin platform to tap into the other products and services businesses need. So managing their accounting, sending invoices, managing their expenses. And I think by doing that and making it as easy as possible, we're helping to democratize that access to finance. Because we know there remain so many groups that are underrepresented. So a quick couple of stats. In the UK, it's 5.6% of women that run businesses. That compares to 11% in the US, 15% in Canada. So there is a gap there. And research has shown that if women were to start and run businesses at the same level as men, that would add 250 billion to the UK economy. So there's huge potential to keep building on this work, become more equitable, and really try to help that. And I'm pleased to be at Tide and doing our small piece towards those broader objectives.
You've hit on something really important, which is the role of fintechs serving other fintechs, of serving B2B and SMEs. And it was something we see quite a lot in the impact that fintechs have, particularly on what we called the peace pillar in the report, which is how fintechs create more stable, safe, and secure environments for other businesses to operate. And I'm going to throw to you, Robin, on this one, because at Lab 1, from what you do and what you see, are we actually worse or better off in terms of risks to secure and safe and transparent kind of society? But what is the role that fintechs like Lab 1 can play in improving that kind of peace structure in society?
That's a very challenging question. I think we're probably better and worse off in different respects. So data, at Lab 1 we use AI and machine learning to analyze the full corpus of exposed data. And it's a problem that many of us sort of don't think about on a day-to-day basis, but it's a huge problem. There's sort of 100 terabytes of data we've analyzed and processed already. That's impacting 2.2 billion unique digital identities, 30 million companies. And even this year, companies as mature as Ernst & Young leaked 3 terabytes of data through the Clock Mover incident. And what happens every time the data is exposed is there's a feeding frenzy amongst the criminals as they try and find risks that they can exploit. And those risks cascade, I think Accenture call it the cascading effects of a data leak. They kind of cascade into the consumer and retail environment, but they also impact companies and create risk. So I think at the same time that that's happening, startups and fintechs are getting more mature. They're protecting us in better and better ways, but the criminals are also getting equally sophisticated in their use of machine learning and AI. And obviously the geopolitical situation means they've got some great areas in the world where they can kind of be shielded and run these campaigns. So in some respects we're better off because technology is a lot better. In other respects we're worse off because there's more sophisticated criminal networks. So.
You balanced a very balanced issue that I think we found, and I think Janine said the stat that there still is around 40% of fintechs can have a negative impact where they can also be having a positive as well. But perhaps the most sobering stat actually from the report was that what we found was only 9% of fintechs that were assessed were actually making a significant positive impact towards climate action. And Lesley, I know this is the space that you guys do at UImpact, but when it comes to the planet, fintechs are still not quite where they need to be. How do we get there? How do we build a more impactful sector for the planet?
Right. To do that, we need money. Graham, you said there was a huge funding gap. Actually, when I founded UImpact back in 2020, it's exactly for that purpose. We want to mobilize private capital towards sustainability. The funding gap, it's not going to be solved just by public money. How can we mobilize the private money? Whether that's from retail, whether from high net worth individuals, or through pension fund. right? Let's break that down. First of all, okay, we're all talking about transparency. Yes, why or not? But we've been talking about it for over a decade. We're still talking about it, right? Through transparency, we need data. Is it because we don't have enough data? Not really. Look, the market is flooding with all sorts of ESG data, no matter that's regulatory disclosure or ESG rating coming in different shapes and colors. The key word is, how can we leverage all of this data in a human-centric way? We're talking about consumers. Yes, they are investors, but at the end of the day, they are consumers. They are the private money. We should be helping to empower them to put their money into sustainability where it matters, but in the right way. So here's how we do it at UImpact. Firstly, on the financial institution side, where we help the financial institutions to start dealing with the basic. We're talking about digitalization, the marriage of different data. Take the example of sustainable investment funds, which is the mainstream when it comes to sustainable investing for the retail, for the end investors. Step number one, it actually should be marrying this ESG data, regulatory disclosure data into digitalized form, so we can look through the financial instruments. This is how you create transparency. Once that is done, this is where the fun is starting, right? We're switching that around to a consumer-centric way. Let's gamify that. So this is what we do in UImpact. We gamify all this, leverage this ESG data, and turn it into a tool, the data for the consumers to put their money, to take action into sustainability. We can talk a bit more about this consumer-centric later. But what that does, this is the magic of transparency. You manage to mobilize private capital. Greenwashing will have nowhere to hide. And then at the end of the day, ultimately, we are achieving financial inclusion and financial equality. And this is the magic about shifting back the power to the consumers. So that's what we do at UImpact.
I'm going to build on actually two things that both you and Heather just said then, Lesley, which was about when we think about moving large amounts of capital, we do often look to the large financial institutions. But I'm cognizant we have not just 3 SMEs here on the panel, but more than 9 out of 10 companies that exist are SMEs. And I think, and you mentioned even the power of empowering the consumers, but given Tide's success that you covered in serving SMEs, Heather, what key traits do you think fintechs need to have to drive that greater impact that the traditional financial institutions either don't have or can't capitalize on?
Yeah, and so I don't know if it's entirely that they can't. I think from any company, there needs to be that willingness to do more, and then it's trying to figure out, well, what is it that we want to do more of? And so we've touched on data already to some degree, and that can be super powerful. So for sure, for us at Tide, we really want to listen to our members, understand what matters to them, and try to then figure out what can we do to support. And so touching onto women in business, again, we know that women face obstacles. One of the things we hear from our member base is that they sometimes don't have access to the mentors that they would want. They want information about how to digitize their business. They're not totally sure where to go. So we're saying, okay, well, that's a space we can really lean into and take action on. And I know one of the other big themes in the report was that of partnerships. We're fortunate to partner with MasterCard. They've got a scale that Tide doesn't have, and they've got a wonderful program called Strive that we can make we can avail of, bring that to our members. So that's Digital Boost, it's Enterprise Nation, it's Be the Business. So it's these practical tools that we can bring to our member base. So I think that's really important. A very different angle, and anybody reading the headlines this morning, September, the warmest one on record, that's not great. What can we do on the planet? And on that front, that's been really led, from the top, our CFO, Ian Sutherland, a real passionate advocate for net zero. And I'm thrilled to say that Tide is the first fintech globally, to remove 100% of our emissions through durable carbon removals. And so that's super important, and I think that really cements that commitment that Tide has to be fully net zero by 2030. And we want to go even further, and clearly that involves how can we help, again, our member base themselves become net zero. And we know that small businesses want to do the right thing. They want access to that. So that's, again, something we're looking to do in partnership to help our member base, understand their emissions, reduce their emissions, and ultimately offset those emissions. So I think you can be small and mighty.
Yeah.
We can find places to partnership and do that really effectively, and therefore actually as a FinTech have an outsized impact on a number of these different SDGs. So that's what we're trying to do, and it's wonderful to see events like this, bringing that community and bringing the industry together, of committed players that want to do the same.
That's excellent. And Robin, I know you guys do a lot you work with big partners and that as well. What do you think needs to be done by FinTechs?
So in 2007, I saw a keynote speech by Tim Berners-Lee, and I wish I could put the slide up here. He talked about the fact that every time there's an idea, there'll be a new technology and a social impact with that idea, and then when that idea is used in a micro way, a small way, it doesn't really create any challenges for anyone. But when it gets adopted in a macro way, back then he was talking about email and spam, the second it's a macro adopted technology, it creates loads of societal problems. I think he's haunted by his creation of the web and the sinister aspects of it that we tend to ignore in everyday life. And what then happens is, as it's adopted in a macro way, there are issues, and then people have ideas to fix the issues, and so it goes on. And really, I think the only thing I can say in answer to that question is, it's just a cycle. Every time we create new innovation to sort of protect ourselves or to drive change and make things better, there are people, unfortunately, who will look for nefarious ways to use that technology to attack the system. And so you need to use those technologies for good because they'll be used against you. And I think that's why FinTech have a massively important role to play. They will create great things that impact everyone in a positive way, and they can also create things that solve the macro challenges, and certainly at Lab One, that's what we're focused on.
Lesley, what more?
I talk about shifting the power back to the consumers, and I mean it. If we look at the market, I worked in the city for a decade. What we realize is that a lot of focus on data. Yes, we see this flooding with ESG data. A lot of focus on financial products. We push products. You see sustainable investment funds, there are thousands of Article 8 and 9 funds. But what is missing? Come on, finance is all about people. People's behavior is human-centric. How can we use the behavioral side to understand the needs of different types of investors, different types of consumers, so that the hyper-personalization, what can be catered for them to exercise that power? I mean, I talked about transparency, and that comes from, they can use the transparency to really drive change in this industry. One thing very briefly then is partnership. If you want to go far, you go together. That's why we're starting to partner with global consultancy firms. We were part of the Accenture FinTech Innovation Lab, partner with the financial institutions, and also in the ecosystem, we partner with scale-up startups in the system to really start driving the change.
Well, that's a perfect end to I think we'll throw the last question here to Graham to wrap up the panel, which is from your broader sector perspective, what's the takeaway for everyone in the room and for someone like an Accenture? How do we truly mobilize FinTech as a force for good?
Big question again. I think for me, from a FinTech point of view, it's about being aware of the SDGs and what those opportunities areas are, and then how you're addressing those. I think for a non-FinTech, it's about how do you help the biggest challenge that FinTechs have, which is that scale effect. So whilst the impact is big, it's also sometimes small. So how do you elevate that up? And that is where we play a role. So our lab is very much an accelerator for enterprise to FinTech partnerships, running it again next year. So feel free to apply or refer people to it. But to Lesley's point, it's absolutely about how do you elevate those great ideas, those great founders to that broader success, but not at any cost. So we've got to do it sustainably, we've got to do it with equality, and I think that then is really having a force for good.
Well, that's it from this panel. So thank you to all the panelists. And just to remind everyone again, if you're interested in the Impact of FinTech report, to scan the QR code and ask these fine people any questions over coffee. So thank you.